Welcome everyone to this virtual event. I'm Jamie Blosser. I'm the Executive Director here at the Santa Fe Art Institute and want to thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight's conversation is part of a series of virtual events that we're going to be hosting over the next few months to mark our 35th anniversary and to generate a virtual space for meaningful exchange and critical inquiry by our residents and alumni. These events will include Zoom conversations like tonight, our new podcast, Tilt, Instagram takeovers, interactive performances, and presentations, all with a goal to shine a light on how the creative work, identities, histories, and experiences of artists, designers, academics, and culture bearers are reshaping and impacting the dialogue and response to pressing social issues and current events. We come to this virtual space from Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is the traditional territories of Pueblo, Nide, and Southern Ute peoples, and have also been home to the Dene, the Navajo. The original Tewa name of Santa Fe is Ogopoge, which means white shell water place. Please join us in reflecting upon and honoring the sacrifices and invaluable contributions made by the indigenous culture bearers who came before us and who are here now. Wherever you're located, we ask that you please reflect upon and acknowledge the history of the land and its original inhabitants. Tonight is our inaugural event titled Unprecedented Again, with SFAI alumni Veronica Jackson, Christopher Kojzar, and hosted by alumni Elizabeth Burden. Liz has designed tonight's event with SFAI staff and will moderate the conversation. She is a multidisciplinary artist whose works interpret and reinterpret personal and societal narratives about identity, memory, belonging, invisibility, erasure, and the unspeakable. The common thread that runs through all of her work is to look at old realities anew, to confront these realities, reflect upon them, shape them, and transform them. Liz holds bachelor's degrees in journalism and studio art and a master's degree in geographic information science. Liz will focus tonight's conversation around art and aesthetics being simultaneously invisible and hypervisible and being hyphenated artists in this moment. Artist activists, artist interpreters, artist researchers, artist archivists, artist historians, all the complex identities and skills that this group brings to this important work. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks so much, Jamie. I really appreciate the honor and the privilege in being asked to moderate this inaugural conversation. So our title, Unprecedented Again. The title emerged from two seemingly contradictory facts. We live in remarkable, exceptional, freakish times, and we've been here before. At least 100 times in my lifetime and thousands more across the span of United States history. Black life and Black art often exist in spaces of contradictions. Again and again, we Black artists use mine the themes of racism and racialism, pain and suffering, sorrow and joy, abjection and righteousness, invisibility and hypersurveillance, marginality and humanity, confinement and freedom, injustice and resistance, duality and singularity, erasure and representation, problem and possibility, the list goes on. And yet each of us does so in a novel, original way, unprecedented. Some artworks are groundbreaking, others are in subtle conversation with artists and artworks that have come before, a call and response. We reflect on our lives and our histories and those of our literal, figurative, and fictive kin to tell a story, the story, our stories. You see me, therefore I am. The images that are being shared on the screen are representative of a very, very small part of African-American visual culture, of course. They are but examples. These works and that of countless other Black visual artists encourage us to breathe and to look where no one else is looking, and for others to relook more consciously, and sometimes to gaze more deeply at what is in plain sight. Now, gaze is a slippery concept. Its denotation is to look steadily and intently, especially in admiration, surprise, or thought. Yet generations of Black artists from the beginning of our art making on Turtle Island have sought to challenge, subvert, or disrupt what we now call the white gaze and the white imaginary, which can be anything but admiring. Curator Rosa Martinez once wrote, "The artist may be a healer, an inventor of worlds, a worker who activates social relationships, a researcher seeking lost paradises, an electrician generating new connections, a theoretician studying cultural identities and their displacements, or a laborer dismantling the hermetic constructions of the powers that be. The world calls upon Black folks with creative spirits to be hyphenated artists, as Jamie mentioned, artist-activist, artist-archivist, artist-historian, artist griot, artist-interpreter, artist-facilitator. Again, the list goes on. Unprecedented, again. The two artists joining the conversation today live and work in the historical tradition of artists who have been making art for millennia. Veronica Jackson is an interdisciplinary artist whose works examine identity, agency, and empowerment as performed by African-American women in the visual landscape. Jackson uses text-based works and installations to critically elucidate the visualization of gender and race in America that speaks to the portrayal, perception, and legacy of Black women in popular media, both past and present. She received a master's in visual arts and critical studies from California College of the Arts. Her works resonated with me immediately for perhaps obvious reasons, both being Black, female identified of a certain age, and for some not so obvious ones that you may discern as she talks about her work. The feeling her works evoked for me were recognition and relation. Our second artist joining today is Christopher Kojzar, who received his BA in International Affairs from George Washington University and his MFA in Intermedia and Digital Arts from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He has been an artist in residence at, I'm gonna butcher this name, but La Napoule Foundation, Creative Alliance, Crosstown Arts, and of course the Santa Fe Arts Institute, among many others. He just recently returned from France, where before the global COVID pandemic, he implemented his practice in the streets of Paris and led drawing workshops for the Agency of Artists in Exile. Christopher researches and creates art in response to interactions he has with other people when he enters active public spaces and openly engages in artistic practices such as drawing or recording with wearable technology. Prompted by interactions with law enforcement, bystanders, and the spaces themselves, his work explores the troubled phenomenon of observing and being observed in an era of escalating surveillance and mistrust, complicating it further by signaling his identity as a Black man. He says it wasn't until a year into his practice that he figured out that surveillance guidelines of the See Something, Say Something campaign deemed sketching in public as a suspicious activity. The perpetuation of racism, fear, and gender norms stood out in many of his experiences, yet in equal measure, he considers how drawing can be a form of cultural diplomacy, using it as a mechanism to advocate for trust and amity within public space amid sweeping revisions to security laws in urban environments. His work prompted me to ponder deeply the geographies of public space again. The format of our conversation is as follows. Veronica will present here in just a minute, followed by Chris. They were asked to select works that resonated in this particular moment. After, we will have a dialogue, a conversation, and that includes the chance for you as audience members to pose questions via chat. One final thought before we begin, I want to say thanks to SFAI for its support of contemporary artists, for me personally in my artistic practice, and for its work around anti-racism, anti-heterosexism, social justice, and many other issues upon which it is grounded and working that are too many to name here. And with that, please welcome Veronica Jackson.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much. Thanks to everyone who has joined us online. Thanks to my many supporters that I have gathered and have come to me in these past 3 years that I've been making art. And my utmost thanks to SFAI. And I have said this to them before, but it bears repeating. SFAI is the place where I first started making art, where I recognized that I was an artist. They gave me the jump start for my visual art making practice. I will always be indebted to this institution. And it is the reason why residencies should exist. They nurture artists, and for me, they birthed an artist. I learned to give myself permission to be an artist at SFAI, and I understood that I had something to say as a visual artist. With that said, my practice is autobiographical. It represents and looks at invisibility, hypervisibility, and devaluation of Black women specifically, but those three terms can be connected to many people on the planet. It's not exclusively for Black women, but this is what I am focusing on as a Black woman. So let's start the first slide. This series is called The Language of Invisibility. And this is one of the first works that I've done as a visual artist. And it was one of the first works that I did at SFAI. Once again, SFAI gave me the opportunity to create works of art. And this was a piece that had been like percolating in my head for probably a couple of years, but I didn't think that I was capable or worthy of being an artist. But this idea was there, and it was prompted by an incident that happened while I was living in San Francisco. I was in the Whole Foods market, and I was standing in line and ready to check out. And this white guy came up and walked around me and proceeded to the cashier. And when I asked him, I was like, okay, I'm standing here, you just went around me. He said, no, you weren't. No one was standing there. I literally just walked up and went to the cashier. And so that slight against my being, that element of invisibility, I had never experienced that before. And it was something that made me think, okay, there's something I need to do with this. And it stayed with me for like about 6 months. And then I came to SFAI and I had this idea of like, okay, let's put this text on Black bulletin boards. So the whole concept of Language of Invisibility series is Black text on Black bulletin boards. So the words are very, what's the word I want? They are almost invisible. They are there. You can feel them, you can touch them, you can barely see them. Just like I felt at that moment. I felt like I was invisible. I felt like I was not seen. So these 4 phrases are phrases, 2 are mine, and 2 I asked Black women friends who have also had that idea of invisibility, or just that being of not being seen, that element of not being seen happened upon their bodies. And so 2 phrases they contributed to this 4-panel series, the other 2 are mine. And then as I was developing this series, I looked at, okay, what happens if you start to substitute out white letters and a subliminal message starts to be read? So along these 4 panels, you'll see this message of refuse me, help, I feel invisible, spelled out in the white letters. Next slide. And so this is a close-up of the one panel. This is the panel that started it all for me. So, oh, I did not see you, simply because you refused to see me. And that is how I felt then. And in some ways, I feel the same way now. And what's happening in the world, in America right now, with the brutalization of Black people in the public sphere. This invisibility is starting to happen, but now we are becoming more visible, and the protests are showing that someone is seeing us, someone is seeing the pain, someone is seeing the violence against the Black body, and finally we're going to talk about it and speak up. And I am doing that as a Black woman artist. I'm doing that as a visual and a cultural producer. Let's go to the next slide. So speaking of devaluation, this piece, "That's Pops' Money," was born out of that phrase, "That's Pops' money," from my uncle, who disrespectfully said that about my grandmother's money that she was getting as a pension from my grandfather's death. So "That's Pops' money" signifies the devaluation of the Black female body, specifically in my family. How that my grandmother was married for 67 years to my grandfather, bore him 9 children, worked inside the home this entire time, and still that labor was not valued. Let's go to the next slide. So this is an example of a time card. I created 813 time cards to signify my grandmother's labor. So this time card, this is 2 time cards side by side, so you can see the labor that she did. And this, you know, it is some of the labor that I made up. I interviewed my mother, I interviewed my aunts to ask, you know, what did grandma do inside the home? And they gave me some pointers about these things. My grandmother also took care of me when I was a child. So I remember the things that my grandmother did inside the home. So let's go to the next slide. So this project contains 813 time cards, 1 month for each of the 67 years that my grandmother was married to my grandfather and labored inside the home. These time cards in this installation were installed on white panels, and I think there were 10 of them in this space. And so this 813 cards are displayed in a room, very cloying, kind of like oppressive, so that you can be surrounded by my grandmother's labor. Next slide. So this project, Obelisk KKK, was done as a result of a gallery here in Bedford, I live in Central Virginia, who asked for artists to respond to the Charlottesville uprising that happened in 2017. And so I was looking at the Civil War monuments and memorials that exist in this country, and specifically in the South, and here in Bedford, Virginia. On the county steps of the Bedford Courthouse is that middle I obelisk, and it is a memorial to Confederate soldiers. And I was looking at the idea that, okay, an obelisk is a symbol of oppression. It's Rome's sacking of Egypt. Rome stole, I think, about 20 obelisks from Egypt, brought them to Rome, and they still exist there. And so I'm looking at the obelisk as a shape, as a symbol of oppression, and then I just spelled the word out, O-B-E-L-I-S, and noticed that, you know, with that last letter K, I added 2 more Ks, and then that kind of like prompted this idea of, like, similar to the idea of oppression, this is what the KKK also does. It's a symbol. It's also an organization that wants to oppress and conquer others. Next slide. And now these final slides look at the work that I'm doing currently. Many of my projects, like I said, look at Black women's invisibility, devaluation, and hypervisibility, but also they look at Black women's lives right now. And with this piece, I'm also looking at race and gender, but this piece I'm looking at racism. And so I'm doing a series of masks, and these are the prototypes for the masks that I want to do. And in this time right now with COVID, you know, the mask should be more mandatory than it is, but racism is more contagious was this phrase that I heard that just made sense to let's put this out there. on a mask. And masks not only prevent us from hopefully contracting the disease, but they're also a form of advertisement. And that is what I'm doing with these masks. And a lot of my work is about advertising these issues. And the next slide. And this piece I did in honor of Breonna Taylor. And going back to the whole element of, you know, Black women being invisible and not getting the just due in some ways of their visibility, for lack of a better term. I did this piece in commemoration of Breonna Taylor's birthday. A Black woman was silenced today. That was for when she was killed by 3 white police officers who still have not been arrested for that crime. And so, like I said, this is a part of a series that I'm doing, that this is the prototype. And I hope that this will bring attention to the invisibility of Black women. And I'll just end it there, and we can talk more about it in the Q&A section. Thank you. Oh, I forgot this last piece. I have 20 seconds. So this one last piece is another piece that I'm working on, and it is a series of personal ads that I am making and printing. And I can talk about this more in the Q&A section if anyone wants to hear about it. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Veronica, for talking and giving us so much insight on your work. That's actually a great kind of point to make, that Breonna Taylor's killers are still actually not arrested. So I just want to make people aware of that. And then I'll begin my talk as well. I am presenting a series of images that are basically cell phone documentation of me interacting with other people while I draw in public. And this is work that started in grad school while I was at UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And it'll kind of like go through these images that have no particular time order. It's almost like you're looking at images that are a little bit like viscerally moving to me. And I want to address things that kind of unpack the images. So basically the bodies that are involved, the site of the images, and maybe a little bit of the history of those sites and what they are. So the Santa Fe Art Institute was actually one of the first residencies that I called upon to actually create more work around this theme of drawing in public. So it gave me a chance to explore it in the Southwest. And I've thus taken on this practice in dozens of places around the United States, as far as Hawaii, and then I've gone all the way to Europe to practice it, as far as Karlovy Vary in the Czech Republic, or I just came back from Cannes in France, where 2020 in March was the last time I actually drew in public. So these themes of hypervisibility, invisibility, and this moment where we're seeing demonstrations in the street for Black Lives Matter, they're kind of multifaceted and layered in my work. And I will explain a little bit more in the Q&A of there's some sites that you can go to visit more polished talks about my work, where I'm presenting 20 to 30 minutes about the process of making these images and what the steps are to creating interactive sculptures, and giving kind of like a historical relational value to why it is that so many people are interacting with me while I draw. So this is basically, just simply put, I go out in public and I take my sketchbook, and more often than not, people will come up and approach me to see what I'm doing. So, which is totally understandable in my mind. I think it's a romanticized thing that we see people drawing in public, and we want to see what they're doing. You know, we want to see if they're good at what they're doing. the value of the drawing in the slides that I'm presenting we shouldn't pay too much attention to the actual value, the valuation of it being a good or a bad drawing. But I want to focus on the bodies that are there. So right now you are seeing partially my body from my chest down, and then a police body in front of me, who is approaching me to tell me that it's okay to be sketching in this particular location. This is Saturday, February 3rd, 2018. It's about 3 p.m. In this interaction, I am actually in the Oculus hub of the site where the old World Trade Center was. So this is collectively, it's a very traumatic spot for American current history, right? So this is post 2001. This building has basically just been become like kind of like a place for like as a mall. It's a travel spot. It's also like an architectural wonder. So I go into this place, and I really don't talk about this much in my talk. So I'm gonna kind of like, I'm doing this off the cuff in a way to kind of give you to kind of run through this all, and it'll probably be a little bit disjointed, but these images where I'm going, and this one in particular is at an airport. So the last one was at the World Trade Center. This is at BWI Airport. And again, this is a site where there's a lot of historical trauma surrounding terrorism. And in this instance, it's a Monday. It's 2017, and it's probably around like 12 noon. So there's a conversation that comes up when I'm drawing in this spot. A TSA agent approaches me and is like, "Hey, you've been looking up and down a lot, and we wanted to know what you were doing." I'm like, "Oh, I've been drawing." And he's like, "Okay, well, that's kind of weird." And yeah, it is kind of weird for a grown man to be drawing in a airport or even at the Oculus Hub, but specifically at the airport on a weekday, you know, at a place where there's a lot of travel happening. So when I'm presenting these images, I want you to know that there is a lot of stuff that we need to unpack, because to me, it's not really about the drawing. It's more about the relationship I have with the person I'm interacting with. So when I'm going to the airport or the US Capitol building or the Oculus Hub, like anybody else in urban environments, I'm going to arm myself a bit, and I'm going to disassociate myself with my environment and realize that I have this kind of, I kind of put myself more in a survival mode than I would if I was in my house in a comfortable setting. So when police are approaching me, I'm not doing anything except really sitting, or in the case of the Oculus Hub, I was standing, and it's usually just the sketchbook that's in hand. So I get these pictures. So this one is actually, in this image, it's actually just me with a sketchbook, and I'm sitting in front of like one of the areas where people are going to be, I guess they're getting scanned and everything, and they're putting their luggage through the conveyor belt. So I'm sitting in this area, and I'm just with my sketchbook. With the one in the Oculus Hub, I have my sketchbook on a stanchion. It's a stanchion, which is like it's a post in the middle of the ground. It's bolted to the ground, and I'm standing there, and there's a lot of officers that are coming up to me. So there were 5 security guards, mostly black, and 2 officers. And most of these interactions take place in the course of a couple of minutes. You can move to the next slide. So, or maybe not. I think that I might have had my time up, but like, I wonder if that's actually, if we should segue.
No, Chris, I think it's maybe a technical glitch. You still have time, so give us a minute. Okay. We love technology when it works and when it doesn't, or when it's against us. Not so much.
So anyway, the things that aren't kind of noticed in these images is that these officers are in a state of question. They see a black man who's in this who's in this this stance that could be, it has been read as threatening before, and they're basing it off of their training. And I am seeing it as someone who's actually just a citizen, part of this country, and treating every space as free space. So public space is kind of like I can move around. I have the option of moving around without fearing for my own bodily safety. I know very well that when I go into the Oculus Hub or to the airport, that inside of me, there is going to be these feelings of anxiety and I would say like borderline like fear. Like I think that something that most people have when, I won't generalize to like say that other people will have fear when they go to the airport, but it's a high anxiety kind of environment. And the officers or the police bodies that I'm interacting with, they are addressing collective trauma. So they're addressing this idea that we in this country have a general fear towards Black bodies and brown bodies and people who seem like there might be something more than just, there's like a racial bias involved in a lot of this. And there's something I'm not hitting upon either, but let me see if I have time. Yeah, so this work is kind of about, to me, it's about surveillance. So, and it's also about counter surveillance, and it has also nothing to do with just my body. So this is one of the drawing workshops I held in Paris, and it is a Iranian non-gender conforming person drawing in public and having this interaction with a man who is trying to pick her up, or them up, I'm sorry. So this conversation that's going on goes on this thread of, yes, drawing in public will probably invite some sort of interaction. And it varies from person to person. So my place, I will get a lot of suspicion, whereas other people might be harassed, or other people might be brought into a better light, right? So, and I've had everything in between. So I've had experiences with police bodies, and I've had experiences where people want to have, want to see me after this, our exchange. Like we're kind of like developing a momentary friendship of some sort that might lead to something else. And in that other extreme, the interaction that happens from creating some kind of trust between people in public space is what I am particularly after. In this particular exchange that's going on here, I think from what I've come to gather is that there is a harassment involved in being in public space. And we all, I mean, that's across the board. And when someone lets their guard down, it seems like there's probably more room to kind of feel the energy of some other stranger and feel like whatever that is that you kind of hold in your body, and you have to kind of mitigate in a fight or flight or stay or kind of response. A lot of stuff that's not captured in these photos is that they do look somewhat aggressive, but at the same time, no one's hurt, right? No one is given any sort of need to feel like they have to get out of the situation. I want to bring this is probably the last slide. And if you go to my talks, which are a little bit better polished, I'm rooting a lot of this work in Flaneurism. And Flaneurism is this French contextualization of being a dandy in public space. And because I speak French, I took this practice to France. And in a quick translation, this is basically, before I even started drawing is where this text comes into play. So I'm in a park in the suburbs of France. This is last year, and this is primarily a white neighborhood. And a woman, an older woman, like a senior citizen who had actually just been released from prison for murdering someone, looked at me and I was in company, and just to give you like an anecdotal reference, I'm in company with my French brother, his wife, who is also white, and their young child. So it's the four of us walking into a park in Western France. And this woman sees us on opposite, and she's kind of walking towards us. And what she says, "Oh my gosh, a black man. Oh, he's going to steal from us. We better watch out for him." Right? So I have not done anything to mitigate this except my presence, right? Like her implicit bias. And even what's a little bit more complicated in this matter is that she actually did like kill somebody. Not to seem so righteous about something, but that the fear that's kind of happening, ironically, like we don't know anything about one another. My brother and his wife know her backstory and know that she just got out of prison, and we hear her say this, and because it's a new environment for me, I'm looking at it in a way that's like, oh, this is a nice park in France, when in reality, like racism is everywhere, and it doesn't have to do with a bunch of preconceived notions about if someone's going to hurt you. I think it's in our bodies. It's intergenerational. It's been taught, and it doesn't matter how good of a person you are or how bad of a person you are. You're probably holding on to some white body supremacy that is just you haven't really addressed, and none of us have addressed in the entire world. I think that in this moment where I'm kind of like, I'm just walking in a park, I'm taking you guys out of an urban environment. I'm saying that this is not just something to do with the See Something, Say Something campaign of, let's control Black and brown bodies in public space, in cities. This is a global thing. Let's control people that have been marginalized in the past so that we can find a way to maintain a certain preconceived order. I will kind of stop there, and we'll move on to the Q&A with Elizabeth.
Liz.
Thank you so much, Christopher and Veronica, for those things. And again, I will remind those of you in the audience that you can type questions as we go into this dialogue in chat. So, Chris, your last images and Veronica's statements about where this work started both deal to me in different ways with public space and public interactions. Now, it's been said in this era of COVID that the recovery will happen in public space. I'm curious as to, given your works, what you think about that prospect, given your bodies of work. Veronica, maybe, can you start, and then I'll have Chris.
Sure, but I need some clarification about that phrase, like the recovery will start in public space. Give me some context.
Recovery from the trauma of the pandemic, reconnection with community, beyond the economic recovery. I think they're really more talking about the recovery of the social and normality, if you will happen in public space.
Sure. And so, I'm sorry, so what's the question again?
So what, given the context of your work and the work, the genesis of some of your work, what's your perspective on that in terms of recovery for Black and brown people, if you will?
Well, for my work, what's interesting about the public space or the restricted public space that I'm living in now, I still get opportunities to make work, meaning I still get slights against my being. So if I am out, I am still seen as invisible in some places. So the restricted element of COVID really has not like lessened the amount of slights that happen against my Black body. I can say that. Otherwise, I mean, I will be excited to get back out in public, mostly for me to go like to museums and see work and get inspiration from other artists. So I don't think that, you know, COVID has not affected me that much. And in fact, I've somewhat benefited because there's so many museums that are doing things online now that I have access to that I would not have access to by living in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Central Virginia. I just don't have that quick access to New York like I did when I lived in DC.
Thanks for that. Christopher, same question and perhaps with a little twist in terms of the hyper surveillance and its relation to recover as well. I mean, Veronica talks in her work about invisibility. Yours, I think, talks a little bit about the opposite of that. And so can you connect some dots for us?
So for me, the idea of recovery in public space has probably consistently gone on. In my lifetime, I probably noticed it more since 2001. So I was in DC when the terrorist strikes happened, and we're addressing something where this term, well, to me it's kind of defunct already. This new normal. To me, there's never really been. Every day is a new normal. There's always going to be something that makes it a little. We're recovering always from something else that happened in the past, and the idea that we are obviously seeing a lot more people taking images and videos of some kind of transgression in public space. And that's going to probably be happening more and more without a doubt. This stuff has, because it's documented and because the media has been able to create kind of like a narrative from this, and which has been always around, I think COVID, I kind of agree with Veronica that COVID it's obviously like shaping everything in the world. So it'll definitely shape how I create art in the public space. And if the recovery happens, it's not, that word recovery doesn't address the millennia of trauma in public space, right? So, it's really, to me, a question of figuring out how do we recover ourselves, right? So how to recover what's happening within us when we go out in public space, because there's been more people on this planet. There's always going to be a rise in population, I think, that will make cities much more densely populated, and controlling bodies when I talk about public space, it goes more towards urban areas, but there's going to be a control, or there's always been a control of the native people of this country and the marginalized populations that are brought in. So to me, I don't know what recovery in that sense is really.
How about reclamation? Let me ask it this way. Do you all, in what way do you feel that the works that you make, or the works that you share, because I know it's not your whole body of work, you all shared a very small segment, but the works that you shared are in some ways a reclamation of space? And if so, how?
I wonder, you know, I'm not, when I go out and do this, it's funny that you say that. For me, it's more intuitive, and it's saying that I generally feel uncomfortable in a lot of public settings with strangers. And I think we all can kind of attest to that. And that seems to be heightening more in a lot of areas where our comfort level is, we disassociate with our bodies. And yeah, I'm reclaiming, if anything, I'm trying to get more in tune with that relationship that I have to the outside world and to the people that are a part of it. So I would hope that, like, I'm still trying to figure out ways to, specifically on the East Coast, like how I can reshape my work practice. Because the last time that I actually did do a drawing exercise in public was in France and was in March of 2020. And most of the interactions were people tripping over my feet, right? And I was sitting down. And the other interactions were pretty cool. Like it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. So just to have something more reclaiming on a bigger scale for the need to address how we treat property in this country and how we treat divisions, I think are necessary. And it's probably within, it's within within communities themselves, and with communities that what I feel like I've heard on a lot of fronts, like Black and white communities of the same class line, that they think a civil war is going to come in this country. And anyway, that's kind of, it's like a fear, right?
Yeah. Can I jump in?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, Veronica, same question, and jump in, please.
Yeah. When I think about reclaiming space, and part of my bio, I talk about, like, I'm a Black woman marking space. And I'm marking space by the work that I make. And I have an architecture background. So I'm trained as an architect. I'm a student of architecture. Architecture is part of my being. It's the foundation, literally and figuratively, of my work. So this whole idea of marking space, I do as an artist, as a designer. It's like I put visual elements, visual constructions out into space. I haven't done a lot of public work, and that could be the next thing that I would love to do. But thinking about reclaiming, let's talk about, like, the monuments that are coming down, right? So in some ways, there are people, like, reclaiming that kind of, like, Civil War, but also white supremacist monuments that existed that are now coming down. So I think in some ways that's part of a reclamation. And I am not a proponent of tearing the monuments down. I think we need to reinterpret them. But that's a great conversation for another time. Because if we tear down all of this history that existed, then it's erased, then we might then repeat these issues again. But I'm going off the track here.
Well, Veronica, yes and no. You give us a bridge into, in the introduction I spoke of, and in our prep conversation, we spoke about hyphenated artists. So sure. You kind of brought up artist as interpreter. Let me first ask each of you, and we'll start with you, please, Veronica. What's the most important hyphenation you'd add to your artist title in this moment in time, and why?
Artist-archivist, because my definition of an artist is one who records, interprets, and makes aware the complexities in which we move, navigate, experience this human condition, and then what we do about it. So with that said, at this moment, I see my art as activist art, in putting out, realizing, introducing people to this element of this plight for me as a Black woman, this invisibility, but also hypervisibility. And I want to go back to something that Chris talked about. And I didn't talk about hypervisibility much in my talk, because the piece that was my visualization of hypervisibility I didn't show as a slide. But similar to you, Chris, I was in a park one day in San Francisco, and this white man came up and asked me if I needed money. He thought I was homeless. He offered me money, either homeless or a prostitute. But once again, it's like, there are those two things, right? So this Black body, you must be, if you're sitting in a park, I was on a bench on the phone with someone, and he's offering me money. And this happened 2 other times in San Francisco where I was called homeless. And that sparked a work that I did at SFAI. So that hypervisibility, it's like, once again, it's like, we're beyond just being normalized.
Thanks, Veronica. Chris, same question. What's the most important hyphenation you'd add to your artist title at this moment in time, and why?
So in the framework that we've kind of addressed, I like archivist. I'm archiving stuff, and the activism is the art, right? So, but for me, it's archiving anecdotal experiences, or experiences that have happened to me in my life experience. And I think have happened to plenty of Black people, and Native people, or a lot of people share these kind of, they can probably call like 12 recent experiences in the past, year, where they were either consciously or unconsciously aware of someone else's bias towards them. So I'm archiving a lot of the stuff, and I'm also digging into the archives of history to look at how I can frame this. So yeah.
Thanks for that. While we have you on screen, Chris, there's a question that came in about interactions, and so I want to pose that question to you, and then Veronica, I'm going to ask you a slightly different variation of the question that came in. One of the audience members asked, can you talk about what was said in the interactions with police, or that has what's more about what's said in the interactions with police when you're drawing in public space?
Sure. So just kind of like quickly saying, there was a slide that we didn't really get to, but there was the first time I had an interaction with an officer was on Capitol Hill in front of the Capitol building, and the police came up behind me and was basically like, "How does it look? How does the drawing look?" He had probably been patrolling that area for the better part of the day, because we had about a 15-minute conversation about drawing, about this guy that was sleeping on a bench. And then I even asked him, "Why did you even come up to me? Do I look like a threat?" And he shook his head and said, "No, I just kind of wanted to see what you were doing." And I was like, "Okay, that's cool." We kind of had this kind of back and forth, and it was pretty kind of relatively low key in terms of any kind of threat that I felt. When I was in the Oculus Hub, the officers had thought that I was using this stanchion as an easel. So they came up to me within seconds of me putting that sketchbook on top of the stanchion, and they were like, "Hey, what's going on over here? We thought you were, what's going on?" And it's all recorded in a video that was part of a body cam that I was wearing. So the conversations are on record, and you can hear that, like, I'm actually pretty. I kind of don't even know what I'm saying. Like, I'm not even really thinking about how I'm addressing them, because I'm so wrapped up in what's happening, that there's two officers in front of me trying to figure out if it's okay for me to be drawing on top of a stanchion. And then a bunch of other security men come up to me and say, "Hey, you can't really do that right now. You can't do that here. You're not supposed to be drawing in this area." Both them and me knew that it looked kind of bizarre.
Right.
And that's what they were kind of trying to figure out. So, yeah.
Thanks for that. So Veronica, a slight twist to that question. So the source of the work that you shared were art interactions, and you shared also that every day there's still slights on your body that leads to more work and the like, that leads to exhibitions, hopefully, I guess, that generate more interactions. Mm-hmm. So two questions. One that came in from another participant: where do your works most often show? Are they made to be shown in a gallery? If you could put your work anywhere, where would it be? And do the interactions from exhibiting the work also make it into your work in a different way?
Well, right now I've had 2 gallery shows, so I'm very lucky, I guess, in some ways. I mean, I've only been making art for 3 years. And friends of mine keep saying, "You need to be patient, Veronica, you need to be patient." But, as an older woman, it's like, starting from scratch is something that I am not very patient about, but these experiences are beautiful. So I've had 2 gallery shows, one in Charlottesville, Virginia, one in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is both near me, which is great. So 2 art centers, Riverview's Art Space in Lynchburg and Chroma Gallery in Charlottesville. And both of those curators there are very supportive of my work. I also have shown this will be the 3rd year in a row for the Flow Art Festival that is in Charlottesville. And that work is outside. And so I did a series where I wrapped trees with armbands with the names of enslaved Africans who worked at Monticello embroidered into those armbands. So that's where I show my work. I would love to have more opportunity to show my work. In fact, I just entered a call for exhibits today for a gallery in Norfolk, Virginia. And then remind me of the second question, please.
Do the interactions from those exhibitions that you might have with the public make their way into your work in a different way? And if so, how?
Sometimes they do. And usually the comments that people say, if I happen to be in the gallery at that time. But otherwise, I mean, unfortunately, I'm not there in the galleries with my work, so I can't hear people's comments. And I do read the comment book, and sometimes I get sparks of ideas from those things. But one encounter made me know that my work was successful when I showed the work in Riverview's Art Space in Lynchburg, the piece with That's Pops' Money. Actually, no, it was the 4 panels, Language of Invisibility. And these 2 young white guys were reading the label, and they looked and they were like, I can't believe people are so stupid. People are so mean. So they were just like, people should just stop doing these crazy things. And I was like, they got it. So then that's that art activist part, right? Because I put something out there that educated someone who may not have thought that this kind of incident would happen to a person, if that makes sense.
It does, thank you. Chris, same question. Where do your work show? Are you focusing on gallery, or where would you put them?
So the next,
anywhere.
You actually go on, if you follow my Instagram, there's a show that I'm going to post about this particular work where you can walk inside of a 3D gallery and you can find my, the virtual reality display of the webcam that the 360-degree camera that has that interaction with police officers. So it's going to be an online 3D gallery exhibit that'll be coming out in a couple of weeks. If it's physical space, I show in galleries, and then I do. So I've given talks about this work in various like academic settings. So there's been I had a talk at University of Michigan last year with the New Media Caucus, and then College Art Association in New York in 2019 as well. The physical work is interactive work. So there's sculptures mainly, or some kind of work that you can, the participant can touch, because it's some of it's video, some of it's like I said, like virtual reality videos. So there's ways that I build sculptures to house these videos. And then there are discrete works of art that I show in gallery settings, or put up for like sale through, like I'm not represented by a gallery, but you can always, there's not much online that shows the breadth of the drawings that I do, or the more digestible art forms that one would put up on their wall. But there's tons of stuff that I have that I'm always developing, mainly around drawing, sculpture, and writing.
So thanks for that. It takes me back to a certain extent to comments you both made about artists as activists or artists as archivists, and this notion of the spaces in which, the concept of the spaces in which our art may show. There's been a recent art news piece related to a canceled exhibition in Cleveland of another SFAI alumnus who was going to exhibit some charcoal drawings of police killings of Black and Latino boys or men, and the museum decided to cancel that show. The images did include the Cleveland Park, where Tamir Rice was killed, and some images of Eric Garner and the like. And part of the reason it was pulled was because there were some members of the local Black community and local activists and some museum staff who objected to it stirring up trauma, felt it was disrespectful of pain and trauma. So I kind of want to ask, in that activistic vein, what keeps our work, what keeps your work, in a certain extent, from being commodification, if you will? And is there a responsibility as an artist activist to others that we may be speaking of or representing in our work? And Veronica, I want to actually start with you with that one, please.
So am I concerned about my work being commodified?
Or that the subject is commodifying your experience, for example, in a way that does it an injustice?
Yeah, I think for my work, once I go back to like educating, right? And that I feel so successful when my art is out there in the public and it does educate people heretofore had no idea about the trauma that African-American women endure. So if that is a form of commodification, I'm happy to allow it to happen. Otherwise, I think in the context
of your particular work, so part of the outcry in Cleveland was because of the family of Tamir Rice didn't want the park where he was to be represented. So I guess the parallel might be if Breonna Taylor's family had some thoughts or views.
Sure.
Would that matter? And if so, what do you think is the responsibility of
the artist?
The artist. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well,
what do you feel is your responsibility?
Sure. And actually that mask that I made, Black Woman Was Silenced Today, in honor of Breonna Taylor, in two things. I purposely did not put her name there because it's a universal element. She is the yet again, the latest example of the violence against a Black female body. But I also did that mask because friends of Breonna Taylor's, family members of Breonna Taylor, put together an online element and asked people to submit artwork in honor of her birthday, because at that time she was like silenced. Even her story was silenced, and George Floyd's story was much larger than hers, even though her incident happened before. And then there's also Ahmaud Arbery that happened before that. So with that said, if the family members, if I did a piece about Breonna Taylor, I would definitely talk to the family members first, because for me, that is why my work is autobiographical. I talk about my story so that I can't offend anyone else. It's from my perspective, it's about my story. And I feel that in that way, I'm being sincere and authentic to this idea of being an artist, a visual artist, educator, and activist.
Thanks, Veronica. Chris, same question to you.
I think I make work separate from this work that's commodifiable outside, like in a, let's say, a particular gallery setting of someone buying a piece of work. I think the institutional structure of museums and galleries are set up in a way that I think don't really commend work that's necessarily like activist work, right? So we're trying to, I think there are two trains of thought that I think are being developed. Is that activist work really shows a really documented perspective of like you were saying before, like some kind of pain or struggle or something going on where it doesn't represent that pretty picture of literally like a pretty beautiful photograph or a painting or something that's sellable or marketable. To create work that is specifically to celebrate the the strengths of Black culture, I think there's definitely a whole way, there's a whole untouched market in the visual art world in terms of representation in galleries and institutions, and also among artists to really figure out how we can address how we celebrate the visual imagery of how we carry ourselves, right? I think it might be part of the reason I don't really have that gallery representation, right? I've based a lot of my career on getting grants, doing residencies, and developing more like my own like self-education on a lot of stuff, or re-education on these issues, or uneducation of what I've learned. So I haven't even considered how to sell the sellable works that I have, right? What I would consider, I mean, all of it's commodifiable, right? But
right. I also think that some folks, again, the protest that happened in Cleveland was about the commodification of our pain, and whether it's appropriate to do that as well. And so, I mean, I think both of you kind of have an elegant response to that in terms of your work is about you and not about others, and therefore that helps with not commodifying the work in a particular way. So we only have a couple of questions. Go ahead.
Liz,
go ahead. I have one last question.
Sure. I want to piggyback off of what Chris just said about the activism piece. And I think that for me, educating the public is a form of activism, because I am changing the paradigm, changing the script from what was status quo by educating people about something that they had no idea existed. So for me, education is activism.
Thanks. We got a couple of questions in chat that I don't think we're going to get to, unfortunately, unless the SFAI folks let us stay and maybe do them in chat rather than on screen for a minute. Sorry for that, audience, but we have a good conversation, and the two questions will take longer than 2 minutes to answer. So I'm going to pull my moderator's prerogative and not ask them, and ask something that's a little bit simpler, and we'll switch gears slightly. And that is this: whose works are you looking at in these moments, in these days? What inspires you? What other artists are inspiring you to keep working in this vein? And Veronica, you're on screen, so I'll start with you.
That is such a good question. Right now, I just go back to my staples, like Glenn Ligon is always inspirational to me. And I recently saw a Romare Bearden postcard of collages. So the point of just good art, and also Carol Walker is always an inspiration, because those artists, what they're doing is like they are speaking to the moment that they're living in. They're speaking to the presence of being Black. So I read art magazines and things like that. No one is coming to mind like that's hot right now that I'm looking at, but I go back to those staples of artists who have great foundations, who have always articulated their craft well. And they always give me inspiration.
Well, it's interesting to me too, those two artists are example of artists as subversive or as disruptors even within their own culture, both of them.
Which
and
were
Carol Walker and Glenn
Ligon. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Ligon, both. So very, very interesting. Thank you for that. Chris, same question. Who are you looking at these days?
It was actually in relation to other shows, but I was looking at Hans Haacke and his attack on institutional structures. I was looking at Nona Faustine because I was in conversation with her recently, and that kind of like pushed me onto her work. I was looking at Fred Wilson recently, and this has more to do with work that has a historical kind of underlined weight to it. So these were like recent artists that I was looking at that I kind of just had, just like, you know, this is recent. This is what I was going to say. So,
right. That's in this moment. So that recent
yeah.
counts in this moment. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both for sharing your work and taking the time. As I mentioned, there were two questions that we didn't get to that SFAI staff have basically said if we have the time, or if you all have the time, that we can do maybe a social media post to address the two questions that came in. One was to you, Chris, about drawing inside the Michigan State House where, you know, white heavily armed militia was allowed to occupy. Would that be meaningful to you as an artist activist? So we may answer that with social media. And the Veronica one that came to you that was about, can you imagine just going out in public with a project you design without any specific support? Would that work for you? Would it be frightening? And what does that mean? So we'll talk offline. You know how Oprah does the show after the show? Well, we would do a social media piece that we can post answers to those questions that we didn't get to. So thank you both. Again, thanks so much to SFAI for hosting this conversation. And I'm gonna turn back over to Jamie to close us out.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Wow, talk about speaking to the moment. All of you did so much tonight, and I'm inspired. I'm looking at the three of you. Truly, that was so powerful. So thank you all so much, Liz, Christopher, and Veronica. I feel like you really, you know, pulled it out and brought it to a place that is so inspiring. And, you know, all of us, all of the SFAI team behind the scenes is so excited to listen to you. And I know that this was also fantastic for everyone participating tonight. I'm always inspired by you, and I learned so much from all of you. I'm so grateful for your leadership and your talent and your courage. So thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it is.
Thanks, Jamie. And everyone have a good evening. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
And thanks to everyone who joined. We're really excited for this new series. As you can see, we have these incredible residents and alumni. So please stay tuned for more conversations. You can follow us here on the screen. And if you haven't yet listened to our Tilt podcast, please do so. We're posting new podcasts each month on our website and also at sfai.podbean.com. And if you can, we would really appreciate if you can please support this work by investing in us today. As SFAI navigates these uncertain times, we face new fiscal challenges, and we seek support for this programming and ongoing operational costs. So whatever you can do, thank you. And please give today, and thank you so much. And thanks again to our fantastic panelists and the entire SFAI team for pulling this off tonight. And everyone have a wonderful night. Goodbye for now.